Okay, so my name is, well, okay, so I go by two different names. So some people call me Brian, and then some people call me Brianna, which is my birth name. Um, I'm 19 years old. I'm in San Diego for school. I am a freshman in college and a microbiology major, and I identify as bisexual, non-binary, and I take any pronouns. So when I was growing up, I kind of always felt like I was like different, but like kind of in like my own way, not necessarily like any way I acted per se, but I kind of felt like I thought differently than other people. I didn't really prefer to like play with like the girls per se. Like I didn't like playing with like dolls and stuff like that and the very like stereotypical like feminine toys. I played like basketball as a kid. And I felt like that kind of being in like that environment helped me like figure out who I was. But that was when I was really young. As far as my sexuality, I didn't figure it out until about like freshman, sophomore year of high school. Um, and that kind of happened because I surrounded myself with like people who were very like accepting, and they kind of helped me understand who I was and that like it was safe to just be myself, even if I was really confused about what was going on. I grew up in a family that is they're traditional Asians, and they're not outright like homophobic or anything like that. But uh, in Asian culture, it's very common to have set expectations for your child, and like one of those is being perceived by other people as normal and like preferable. I guess would be the words. So I kind of grew up in like an environment where like being an outsider or being somebody who isn't doesn't follow the rules, isn't doesn't walk the straight line, was kind of frowned upon. So it really helped to be in school and have like friends that were outside of like my family, obviously. So I went to a school. And my school wasn't really anything special, I guess. Um, it was kind of just in a rich white neighborhood. Um, but that kind of like made it so that like there wasn't really any outright like hate or kind of like bashing or anything like that. Um, and like I said, I already talked about my family kind of stunted me a little bit, which is why it kind of took me a while to figure it out. And I was always just really confused in like middle school. I was like, I don't understand why I'm like this. And my family didn't really like let me express myself or like my feelings. So it wasn't until I met that group of friends who helped me like grow into what I am now. Um, and it was just kind of like being in an area that was like didn't have the judgment that like my family would give me, and they were kind of like if one day if I just said like, well, I'm gay or something, they'd be like, okay, well that's cool, and they would just like move on, and like that's what I needed. Um, I was involved in sports, but I was involved in theater, um, and the theater culture is very accepting, and that was really helpful to me to just be around those people who were just like my friends. They're like, well, you could just be whatever you want to be. Um, and yeah, so I grew a lot in high school. That's kind of like the biggest amount of growth I had during like my school years. Uh, After I graduated, I took a gap year, and I worked in a restaurant for the whole year. Um, and it really helped. It was a different experience than I think most people my age get. And I think as far as my like queer identity, it helped to be somewhere that was like a non-school environment, to be like around people, like real people who like aren't just like stuck with you because we're in school together, and people who work there. Um, and kind of just you're not all the same types of people. So it wasn't just like everybody who's the same age as you. It's like kind of people from all over the world, people from like all walks of life. And it helped me to like kind of just like have a bigger circle of people who understood me and who like accepted me. And it definitely helped me learn to like, when you run into conflict, how to like deal with that. Um, as far as, I think that was something I didn't really understand when I was in high school, like how to use my like vocabulary to talk about who I am and how to get people to understand who I am. And I think once I took my gap year, I understood more like how to use my words to say what I am or who I am. And yeah, when I was in high school, very, I felt like I felt like, this is going to sound backwards, but I felt like even though I was like kind of breaking the rules per se by like being queer, I felt like when I entered this like queer culture, there were like new rules that I had to follow. Um, and I felt like I was very like confined to those rules, like especially as far as like gender, I didn't really understand. Um, like I didn't get how, like I didn't want to be a girl, but I didn't exactly like want to be a boy either, and I didn't really understand like what that meant, and like the rules were very blurred at that point. And I felt like I was like wrong, and I felt like my feelings were wrong to myself, like not that anybody told me that, but like in my brain I was like what you're feeling is like invalid because you don't understand what you're feeling. But now, after like going through high school, after going through my gap year, I kind of feel like I'm a lot more like fluid about it, and I kind of just like go with it. I definitely don't get like as easily offended or like upset if like somebody um like uses like she pronouns or anything, which is why I just use all pronouns now. But I think that's something that's like the biggest thing. I just remember I used to be very strict on myself about that, about following like these like rules that I had made for myself.
You said that you learned how to use your words to express yourself. Like, what do you mean by using your words?
I think especially when I was in high school, I and especially like before I really like realized who I was, I didn't know how to express who I was in a format that people would understand. Like people who aren't queer would get and would be like, "Oh, okay, like that's cool." Or meaning like that's something that they would understand. Kind of, I don't know, I just like grew older. Like I definitely can remember distinctly that like with my mom, I didn't really know how to like use words to get her to understand like this was something that was like important to me and that this wasn't like a phase. Like I didn't know how to like express that to her in a way that she would understand and that she wouldn't be like offended by. So I felt like I grew up a lot like in my senior year and kind of like my the gap year that I took. I grew up a lot as far as like using my words and expressing myself. I think that's something that I just didn't have when I was a kid, is like knowing how to like say words that people will understand when talking about like my queer identity, and saying them in ways that like aren't, I don't want to say like weaken me or anything like that, but using them to strengthen my like points and like to say, well, this is how it is, and to not like really back down if somebody didn't accept me.
So, do you have like anything to say about how like the straight people, how they should like interact with people, like with queer people?
I think for anybody who isn't like in the queer community, at least in my opinion, I feel like the best thing you can do for us is to, I think that like being queer is a big deal, but I don't think it should be something that's like made into like to be like, wow, like you're gay. Like I feel like if someone came out to you, you should say like you should still just support them and love them, but like it shouldn't be something that's like a big deal. I felt like what I needed when I was younger was just for people to just accept me, and I didn't need them to like make it into something like bigger than it was, even though it is a big deal and it's like a big part of me. I didn't want them to like, I didn't want it to define me, I think is what I'm trying to say. I didn't want them to only know me as like the person who's like queer, because it is a big deal, but it's like I'm other things. So I mean, I think for like people who are like straight or cis, just, you know, recognize us as just other, we are just other people in your life. Like you don't let your straightness or like you being cis define who you are, or you don't let other people define that as who you are. So I feel like we're just other people